self-compassion teaches us is that we're not alone in this. We need to understand common humanity, kindness, and mindfulness. Being able to bring ourselves back to the present moment and anchor in this moment, understand that this suffering that I'm in right now, this suffering that seems so all-consuming, is temporary. You've overcome things before in your life that others couldn't fathom. You can do this again.
Empathy and mental health are at the heart of true healing and personal transformation. And today we have the privilege of delving into the profound journey of Deny Caballero, a retired Green Beret who has dedicated his life to reshaping the narrative around mental health. With over a decade of leading high-performing teams on and off the battlefield, Dany's story is one of resilience and advocacy. Through his podcast, Halt, Deny is on a mission to normalize mental health treatment by fostering genuine connection and embracing vulnerability. Deny, thank you for coming on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
Well, as our listeners fire up their Strava app and begin their 1 mile walk, let's start with acceptance and having grace with ourselves. Because, from childhood trauma to your military career, you've learned firsthand about the importance of emotional intelligence. Would you mind discussing the importance of self-compassion as it relates to mental well-being?
Absolutely. I would love to do nothing but start off with that. Self-compassion is something that we as men don't foster enough. And as special operations professionals, we certainly don't expose ourselves to that idea. And it wasn't until I went through my downward spiral and had to go through an entire journey of healing that I came across self-compassion. Shout out to Dr. Kristen Neff, an amazing, wonderful doctor that has studied this ad nauseum and has a great book that explains it in great detail. Self-compassion is sort of the antithesis and the opposite of what we have always been molded to understand about, like, what makes us great. We roll into pride really early on. High school sports. Like, I'm only good enough when I'm crushing it. I'm doing great. And you score a touchdown and you make that block and you feel that pride. And pride is there for you throughout the military. You do great. You get promoted. But what happens when you fail? What happens when you can't continue on the track? What happens when you can't continue being that Green Beret? I experienced that firsthand. Pride turns into self-loathing, turns into hatred. Like, look at you. You're disgusting. You're weak. You can't do what you were meant to do for the rest of your life. And what self-compassion teaches us is that we're not alone in this. We need to understand common humanity, kindness, and mindfulness. Being able to bring ourselves back to the present moment and anchor in this moment, understand that this suffering that I'm in right now, this suffering that seems so completely just all-consuming, is temporary. It will dissipate. And in fact, I'm not alone in this suffering. Somewhere out there in this world, somewhere out there in this great, wonderful universe, there's somebody else dealing with the same pain and the same suffering. And I'm not alone. I don't have to sit here on my own and hold on to this. I can let it go. I can let it dissipate. And when you turn that kindness and love inward and you start speaking to yourself with that compassion of saying, hey, you've overcome greater obstacles. You've gone through harder things. It allows you to take a look back at all the great things you've accomplished, all the wonderful things, and even all the bad things, and realize, like, you know what? This is where I came from all the way back then, all those years back, and I made it through all of that. I can make it through this. And that's truly what self-compassion is, being able to look at yourself in the mirror, which is a lot of men can't do, every single morning and say, I love you. You're amazing. You're a wonderful human being. You deserve to be here. And I couldn't do that for a vast majority of my life. And it's funny. I'm 40 now, and I look at all the work that I've done in the recent years. And only in the recent years have I been able to look myself in the mirror and say, you're a great dude. You're a great husband. You do great things for others. You deserve to be here. And that's something that every man, every human being should be able to cultivate. We just don't get a class on emotional intelligence. We don't get a class on empathy. And we don't get a class on self-compassion. It's only when we're suffering and we're willing to search for answers that we stumble upon concepts like Dr. Kristen Neff's self-compassion, Brene Brown's work. It's only when we're truly suffering and we're willing to work and willing to do the deep, deep work that we find these great healers. And we also make ourselves available to our mental health professionals and that start actually working towards getting better. And I think that we're doing a disservice to the warrior class by not teaching this as part of the the building blocks of making a warrior, understanding the importance of emotional intelligence. It's about being able to understand every aspect of our human beings that we're working with. We talk about in special operations and special force, we talk about, by, with, and through working with a indigenous force. Well, they're not going to listen to you if you can't understand the subtleties of their culture and the person you're working with. So we learn it in that capacity, but we don't touch the emotional side. We don't touch the things that maybe make us feel a little uncomfortable, because we have to stop and ask ourselves, like, okay, is this person all right? What would it take for me to ask the questions, to dive a little deeper, to make sure that I'm actually encountering and breaking through that superficial layer? So that's the majority of that emotional intelligence that we don't get, that is so vital to us. And we see it now more than ever. We're talking about masculinity, right? We talk about toxic masculinity. What does that really mean? What is toxic masculinity?
Yeah, no, I mean, you said it so well. Especially, it's very clear that you've gone through a journey to get to this space at this stage in life. And one of the things that we do, even in the very beginning, like let's take an average recruit on the enlisted side. We get into boot camp, and it becomes normalized to talk bad about ourselves and about others. If you can't perform, like, this isn't just something that we wake up with one day. I was having a conversation with a former Army special operator out here in Hawaii the other week, and we were talking to, there was three of us chatting, two of us former military, gone through the boot camp experience, gone through intense training, gone to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we were talking to a peer of ours that had never served, but by his own right had gone through many, many struggles. And as me and this veteran were talking, we were talking about the experience of how our minds were developed to make us believe that if we can't perform, then we're not worthy, then we're less than. And he was just like, well, why don't you just not tell yourself that? And there's a big difference between what we know in our head and what we are able to feel on a daily basis. And so even though I know my life and my value isn't based on my ability to perform well, especially in a physical realm or a professional realm, that doesn't change the way I feel. And so when you're coming through the journey, what was it like to even decide to join the military, having no idea that you're about to go through this life transforming process?
Well, I'll tell you straight up, man. A lot of my life was just nothing but suffering, to be quite honest. I'm not a born American. I'm American by service and by choice. I'm originally from Panama. My biological mother met a service member, and what we didn't know at that time was that man was a predator and was looking for small children, looking for a vulnerable woman. And that's how we got to the United States. My life until I ran away from home was one of just complete misery, abuse, torment. And it's not hyperbole. It's not being dramatic. What I endured as a child, what me and my sisters endured, was nothing short than the most horrible things you could imagine. So growing up in that environment, being told that you're worthless, that you have no value, you are only a beast of burden. You work. That's all. You grow up thinking that not only are you have no value, but you're constantly hearing the message of the only thing you'll be good enough to do in life is to work meaningless labor jobs. So I literally grew up with, I had no support system to say, like, hey, you can achieve great things. You can do wonderful, amazing things. In fact, anytime I had a moment where I spoke up about the things that I aspired about, every kid wants to be a pilot. Every kid wants to be, these great things. When you brought it out, when you spoke it openly, it was quickly shut down. Like, you're too stupid. You have glasses. You'll never be that. You're worthless. I chose the military as a kid in high school. I joined the National Guard because I needed resources. I needed money. I was in the National Guard as a kid in high school. And I would remember getting paid $200, $250 for drill. Hey, that's groceries. And I knew that I could use that service to go to college. But the things they don't tell you is when you don't have a support system, when you don't have a family, when you're on your own, trying to foot the bill for college, even with National Guard supporting, you still can't make it. Could barely make ends meet. And then I realized that I was working extra hard to try to achieve this American dream, but I wasn't a part of the structured system that could really thrive in that environment. I had to go to work full time, trying to go to school. And I'm looking at myself working these jobs that I'm crushing it, working at, manufacturing plants, getting promoted, making money. But at the same time, like, is this what I want my life to be? Do I want to follow somebody else's narrative of what I have to offer the world? And I realized, like, no, I'm meant for more. One of the most beautiful things about the United States of America is if you don't have family to support you, if you don't come from money, you can get ahead in life if you join and you serve. You can get discipline. You can get work. You can learn valuable skills in the military. And I knew that. And I realized that even though the National Guard allowed me to go and do wonderful things, it was never meant to be my place. It was never meant to be some place where I was going to thrive and continue to grow and be able to have that American dream. It just isn't there for you when you're working from a deficit. So I realized going active duty was my only way. And also in that time period, we're in a GWAT. We're in the era of we're sending the entire 82nd Division into Iraq. And I said to myself, like, this is it. This is my shot at trying to get that real American dream. I know I can get more discipline. I can get everything that I need as a young man. Like, I can get it through the military, even if I don't have the conventional systems to support me. And I was right. And I bet on the right horse. I bet on myself. But the things that I also had that I wasn't paying attention to was a whole lifetime full of trauma. When you're dealing with that, the best way to do it as a young man is you just stuff it down. And more trauma begets more trauma. And I joined the infantry, went into the 82nd Airborne, and continued to deploy and continued to work and amassed a lot more. And you stack more trauma on top of that. You stack more on top of that, and you just keep it quiet. But once you got in there, you realize, okay, I can do more. It only took me, a few years to realize, like, this is great. I've learned a lot, but I want to test my mettle. And it's something that I realized a lot of us Green Berets reflect back on, like what initially attracted you to the teams. And that was seeing a Green Beret downrange. And that's what happened to me. Just like so many of us, you're on a deployment and conventional Army rules, they don't cut it. They don't cut it in a war. You're bound by so many different rules and regulations, and you can't take the fight to the enemy. You're seeing people around you die, and you're wondering, how am I doing everything I can? But junior and senior leaders don't understand how to take the fight to the enemy, or they're bound and they can't do what you want them to do. But then you see the Green Berets, you see other soft professionals go after the enemy and be successful. And you realize, if I want to be in combat, I want to be with the very best. And if I made it this far, maybe I can scrounge enough motivation, desire, and maybe I can bet on myself a little more again. And that's what it took. It took me being able to roll the dice and bet on myself and go to selection. And again, it wasn't the beautiful thing about SF. It's not easy going to selection. No one's there to give you a push. No one's there to give you an extra go. It's all on your own. You have to be on your own through that entire process. And when you get selected, you have the ability to say to yourself, at least for me, for that first time in your life, you're like, this wasn't easy. Someone wasn't there just handing goes. I did this on my own. And that was like the first moment in my entire life. And yeah, airborne school's hard, sort of. And infantry life's a little hard, sort of. But when you go through selection and you make it through that with cadre that are looking at you, there's nobody there patting you on the back. There's nobody saying, oh, you did great. No, they have a stern look on the face. They're calculating, they're cold, and it's go, candidate, go. But you made it through that. And it's that little bit of understanding, like, okay, maybe I have enough of what it takes to make this a career. And like every Green Beret will tell you, you continue to earn that beret every single friggin' day. As soon as you graduate, you think, oh, I made it. No, it's another interview process. You got your foot in the door, earn the beret every single day. And that's like the first moment for a lot of guys that you realize, this is where I was meant to be. But it's so great, but you're also not reflecting on any of the things that you've also endured throughout your life. A lot of seasoned Green Berets are coming off multiple deployments in conventional army. They're coming from horrible backgrounds. And I was just like every other Green Beret. Had a whole bunch of stuff being stuffed further and further down in my rucksack. And you just continue going because now you have a higher calling. You have a higher purpose. Now you're part of something greater than you. I belong to a regiment of the greatest individuals. Like, I have to uphold that. It's not about me anymore. I put on that beret, I put on that long tap, and now it's about a regiment of individuals that are just like me, that don't care about all the previous things you've gone through. You just want to continue being the absolute best.
That's absolutely beautiful. And a lot of people would say that is the American dream, but a lot of people also don't realize that part of the American dream for many, many people that either come to this country or grow up in poverty in this country comes from an American nightmare. And it drives us to move forward. And, military service being an only option is a really rough place to be because we don't know any other path forward other than, hey, I'm going to serve. I'm going to give everything that I have. And it drastically changes our life.
And Danny, I got to tell you, man, like I saw the other options. Let me tell you, you're on your own in high school. You apply for any sort of benefits, any sort of resources. And people have this idea, well, government supports anybody that's down on their luck. I didn't want that life. I got some free expired food. Thank you, government. That's awesome. Tried going through college with support. It doesn't work. It's not an existence. You're surviving. I didn't want to survive. I survived my entire life prior to running away. I know what it's like to just be in a place. When I was living in that life as a child, you got food when it was available. You had shelter. Why would I want to sit there? I just escaped this. I just left this. Why do I want to survive? And I say this to anybody listening out there that may be still in that situation. Maybe you're suffering through domestic abuse and you're dealing with that situation where, hey, you get 3 squares and you got a cot. And if you just leave the system alone, leave the status quo, don't ruffle feathers, you can survive another day. Leave, flee. That's what I did. The military, I owe so much to the military. I do. But now that I'm older, now that I'm wiser, now that I'm healed, I did the work. I had mentors that gave me the understanding of what I needed to do. And I followed through with that. Like, that's on me. And that's on every other survivor. That's on every other man or woman that found the military in the same way. Like, a lot of people want to knock it and they want to say things like, well, you could have done it without the military. Yeah, I could have. I would have been using a lot of government support, a government assistance that would have just let me survive, to just be another statistic. Because anybody that's on food stamps will tell you it's enough to get by, and you get addicted to that. There's no incentive to keep going. I could have been another statistic just using government service after government service and just living life and enjoying it and being in comfort. I didn't want that. I got my degree, my first degree. I got it while I was in Afghanistan. It took me a while to get it. But you know what? I'm proud as hell for it. I'm going to school right now on my benefits. And I had to wait. I had to be older to do that. But you know what? I'm wiser. I bring a lot more experience. I'd rather be here in this moment right now where I'm at in my life than go back and gamble it to get an education, to get debt. Everything that I've been able to do, like, we are the greatest country on earth because we have the opportunity. All of us do. If I can do it, you can do it. If you don't have a family with a high social credit score, if you weren't born into money, you can still succeed. I'm living proof. And so many of my other brothers, and that's the thing I didn't realize. When you don't have self-compassion, you experience life as if everybody around you is better than you. Yeah, I don't belong here. Look at me. I'm a dirt kid from nowhere, Panamanian by birth. Look at these friggin' American gods, these gladiators. I'm so fortunate and lucky to be here. But then when you reflect back and you start talking and engaging with all your brothers and you realize how many of them came from broken homes, how many of them didn't have the ability to go to that friggin' nice college and didn't have the support system, and they went to the military. So many of us. But we were all suffering through so much, and we never wanted to give ourselves any sort of self-compassion to say, you know what? It's okay. You belong here. So many of us are the same way. You're not an alien. You're not a pariah. You're a part of this amazing regiment, and so many of us started the same way.
As you were going through your military service, and we've got to keep it somewhat clean because we are displayed on the radio at a bare minimum. We're just going to avoid the F word. But no, like this is part of the culture that we are familiar with. I mean, I've been going to church now for nearly the last 15 years, and sometimes I still slip up. Like I still revert back to old speech patterns, old behavior patterns, because when I look back over my military service, it was a part of my life, and there's so many things in there that shaped who I am, from speech to mannerisms to, when somebody's telling a story, another one comes to mind. Are there any sea stories that come to mind, or deployment stories that come to mind when you're thinking back over your past that you're just like, this was one of the greatest, like most defining moments of that part of my life that helped shape who I am today?
I think the greatest absolute honor I ever had was actually deploying my last time as a warrant officer on my detachment. There's no higher calling. And a lot of guys don't want to be a leader. They don't want to be in leadership position. There's a lot of guys that just want to stay on the team for as long as they can without becoming an 18 Zulu, which is the team sergeant, or becoming a warrant officer. And for me, you have to remember that it's not about being the guy that kicks in the door. It's not about always being the guy that's the assault cell leader. No, we need individuals who are willing to lead. The greatest part about being a warrant officer is being able to sit down and understand the entire picture of the operation, being able to plan the intelligence aspect of it, being able to understand what enemy you're going to encounter, being able to understand, dictate, like, okay, we're not going to meet you on an equal friggin' battlefield. I'm going to give the advantage to my guys. Being able to understand the importance of real military operations. Like when you're a young guy on a team, all you care about is, hey, when are we going? What time are we hitting the objective? And can we make it back for midnight rats? Like, that's it. When you're a team sergeant, a captain, a warrant officer, you're doing everything on the other side of bang. You're doing all the planning. You're doing all the storyboard, all the information gathering that nobody wants to do. But you do it because it's a vital aspect of the operation. And being able to be the warrant officer on my team for that last trip was the greatest honor, because I finally, even though I didn't always recognize it, I understood that not only did I have what it takes to be on that detachment, to make it through all those years on SF, but I had enough determination, drive, and the ability to be chosen to graduate the warrant course and to get put on a team that was going to be sent to one of the most volatile areas in northern Afghanistan. Like, that's one of those things where you can literally hang your hat at on the end of the day and realize, like, holy cow, I made it through that. Very few people get to do that. Very few people will be able to reflect back on the entire GWAT era and say, I was a warrant officer on the detachment. Now I'm part of that. And that to me is incredibly rewarding. And being able to look back on everything we accomplished on that trip, and it's truly one of the greatest, most humbling experiences. And to this day, that was the greatest deployment I've been on. And being able to say, you know what? Like, that was my team. Those are my boys. And I was chief, because few people have that ability. Like, when you earn that title, when you go through that course, you go through all that crap, and now you're chief, that means something. That's a huge thing to carry on. Having that be the pinnacle of my career, absolutely the greatest thing. A lot of times we don't get that. A lot of times guys don't get that last trip. And I was fortunate to have that 2019-2020 trip. There's a lot to be said about not being able to rotate back and understanding that, like, okay, this ends. This chapter of my career ends, combat. There's tons of guys that I talked to. I never got one more trip. And understanding the way the policies and the politics were going in that time period, that's something that myself, my team sergeant, my captain, and the senior guys on that team, we knew. Like, this is probably the last rip. This is probably the last combat we're going to see as Green Berets in Afghanistan. Go full throttle, take it to the enemy as hard as we can, and then we'll always have that for ourselves. And there's so many of those moments that we now get to cherish and get to understand. Like we look at North Afghanistan now, and it's, back under Taliban control. But when we were there, like, we took the fight to the enemy. We were effective across all of our operations, and being able to look back and see, like, had things panned out a little differently, who knows what could have happened? Could we have maintained Afghanistan? I don't know. But for the time period we were there, we did a darn good job of it. And I'm extremely proud of my guys, extremely proud of being able to serve in that capacity. And like I said, not a lot of people get to do that. And I'm now able to reflect back on that and say, you know what? I was a chief on a team and I made it through Afghanistan.
That's awesome. To be able to lead troops in combat is an incredibly rewarding experience. Not from, oh, this was great for my career, or this was great for this. It's because, like, knowing the impact that we had on the junior soldiers, sailors, Marines that were there that got to come home, and leaving that life behind is incredibly difficult, because it's like, when am I going to be able to have such a higher purpose than making sure my team accomplishes the mission and comes home safely? So how did you manage to start transitioning into a civilian life? Because, I mean, the doors to Iraq, Afghanistan, shut, military career coming to a natural ending. There must have been a ton of different emotions and obstacles that you had to overcome.
I would say it was easier because I had a mental and physical breakdown. Everything fell apart for me. I had no choice. Coming back from that deployment, we had COVID. I was dealing with an insane amount of physical issues, but mentally, I was breaking apart cognitively. I didn't understand what was going on. And it wasn't until I got help. It wasn't until I went to inpatient treatment and then follow-on treatment at a polytrauma treatment center that I had some understanding what was going on. We don't take care of ourselves in special operations. There's a long history of injuries that I kept quiet, didn't raise my hand, impact studies that I flat out ignored or just didn't take the test. And cognitively, I was dealing with a lot of issues. And when you avoid everything and you put on that mask and you try to go in the team room, you think that you're doing a really good job. And I always say that I was operating at my absolute best when things started falling apart, but I was actually putting out like 60% of my 100% of what I was used to being able to produce on a team. My memory wasn't there. My left eye couldn't focus. And these were all things that I just was not paying attention to and just trying to ignore. And when I couldn't ignore it anymore, I thought of doing a really irrational thing and had made a plan to end my life. And I thought that was the great escape. Well, if I can't do my job, if I can't perform at 100%, then clearly I'm no good to anybody and I'm just going to end it. And after years of struggling, I thought this was like the best thing. And it wasn't until I had a brief moment of vulnerability with my mental health counselor at our P3 clinic that I was offered the ability to go get help. And that's truly where things started changing for me. And I understood that whatever I'm facing physically, I'm going to have to give up control and accept that I'm going to have to get surgeries. I'm going to have to get treatments, and I can't control this journey. I can't heal the body. I can only focus on myself right now and mentally focus on what I can work. And that made it very easy to understand transition because my time in the military is coming to an end. I am not going to be a Green Beret. I am not going to be on a team. I'm not going to be doing Green Beret things. And I understood now when I was in that treatment center, finally understood that I still had worth. Even though I didn't understand what was coming down the road, I didn't understand what I was going to have to go through as far as treatments, but I knew that I had worth and I knew that I had to start working on my identity. So that was the first thing I started working, was being able to take a deep breath, settle in and realize at the end of this journey, I'm still Denny. I am still a Green Beret. I'm finding something else to do. And that's where my advocacy started growing, when I started getting better. When I finally had resources and I finally started getting a diagnosis, I found operator syndrome through Dr. Chris Free. And that outlined every single thing that I was going through. And finally getting help, finally getting a diagnosis, finally seeing a psychologist and neurologist that could say, hey, look, this is what you're dealing with. You've had a long career of blast exposure. You've had a long history of TBIs. And you've been operating on nothing but high levels of stress. Your system is done. You need to start healing, and this is what we're going to do. And that's when really the identity started being addressed. When I was finally able to get into a treatment center that was able to help me understand, like, how can I recover? Because if I can recover and I can get better, then I can start figuring about my chapter 2. And that made it so much easier. A lot of guys that don't get help before they get out are still stuck with struggling through the physical aspects of their career on the backside. And the only thing they can anchor themselves to is that identity. I let go of that. The most important thing I had to do was get better. And I needed to get better. So that meant I needed to let go of this identity that this was the only thing I was going to do. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for those low points. I'm grateful for being in an inpatient treatment center. It saved my life. And it also gave me the understanding that I'm worth something. I'm more than a beret. You've done hard things before. You've overcome things before in your life that others couldn't fathom. You can do this again.
Thank you for your candor with that. Asking for help, especially in a deploying community, can be one of the most frightening things, because there's going to be people that are listening to this that are going to go, Denny's story is the reason why I won't ask for help. It's going to completely change the trajectory of my life. I mean, it's what happened with my story as well. And one of the things that I knew during that time was, after the military, whether I made it to 20 years or 30 years, which was my goal, I'm still going to have another 30, 40, 50 years that I want to live and be productive and be there for my family. And so I need to take care of these issues as early as possible. And unfortunately, at that point, I had, like yourself, been putting them off for so long. And what I tell people now, I'm like, if I would have known at 28 what asking for help would have meant, I don't know if I would have had the strength to do it then, especially, this was 2011. I mean, there was no end in sight for deployments. I was preparing for my 4th one, and I just wanted to be mentally ready, which was why I reached out. I wanted to be able to lead once more in the fields of Afghanistan, making sure that our medical staff was fully equipped and prepared to take care of their Marines. And this culture in the military of not asking for help, really not showing up to sick call, not showing up to medical to say, hey, I've got some vision problems, or I've got a knee problem. A lot of people don't realize that if you start addressing these things early, they don't become the compounded problem that they become towards the end of the career. And so to get into that routine is incredibly important. And I know medical psychology is catching up with this now to say, hey, if we start talking about this stuff early, which is what a lot of our podcasts do, right? We start telling people it's normal to talk about this. You're not the only one going through it. There's a way to heal it before it becomes a problem in your life. And so how did you become willing to start really accepting that help? I know you had mentioned you began planning for your own death, but when people hear me even express that, they're just like, well, maybe you weren't that bad. Maybe if you just would have, slept it off, you would have been good for the next day.
Yeah, no, it's I absolutely had a plan, and the only thing that saved my life was being vulnerable. You walk in, and for me, her name was Michelle, and I'd only been given her half truths because I wanted somebody to fix the physical. I need you to fix the things that are broken within me physically so I can get back to a team. Well, the only way to get access to a lot of these places was to go through and talk with a mental health professional. But then you realize that, hey, the surgeries didn't work. Your feet are still messed up. This isn't going to get fixed through another surgery. And sitting down in that one moment of vulnerability, telling her that, hey, you know what? I've gone through all this stuff. All the things, every resource you've thrown at me. I have a plan, and this is what I'm going to do. My wife leaves this day on a deployment. I'm going to do it when she's gone. That's where I'm at right now. That little bit of vulnerability allowed for her to put me in contact with an inpatient treatment center that was absolutely the best place I could have gone to. It was all active duty service members. There were SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets dealing with the same thing. Now, when you're in a team and you're sitting there every day and you're watching everybody perform at their best and you're struggling to put out 60%, of course you're going to want to end your life. You're seeing former versions of yourself doing all the things that you could do, but you can't. But not only that you can't, they can't see how hard you're trying to just squeak out that 60%. And then you go somewhere where there's everybody there is just like you, dealing with the same issues. Every other soft professional I met there was dealing with the same things. And some of them had some additional things, substance abuse issues, all dealing from the same thing, all reporting the same cognitive decline, all reporting the same suicidal ideations, all reporting the same things. I used to be amazing. I can't figure out how to get back to being 100%. My memory is shot. My ability to speak is shot. I don't know what's going on. I'm constantly upregulated. I'm living with anxiety, depression, and the only thing that seems like an out for me is suicide. That's the first time I'm surrounding myself, not with, and I hate to make this is not derogatory, but I'm not being compared to baseline normal human beings. I'm now sitting down with other soft professional warriors just like me that are reporting the same thing. And it's like, I'm not friggin' alone. I'm not alone in this. What are we all dealing with? And then we sit down and we're being treated every day by a mental health care team that's looking at us as the only patient. And that's what I needed. That's what I absolutely would tell anybody that's suffering to get help, to go inpatient. And that's the thing that made the biggest difference. That's what helped me. And then continuing to go down that pipeline by advocating for more care. Because it's not just one treatment center and you're done. Oftentimes is you got to go to, like I said, a polytrauma treatment center. They're looking here. They're looking at your musculoskeletal issues. They're looking at everything. And they're looking like an investigative team to figure out what's wrong with this Green Beret, Deny Caballero, what's wrong with him. The best care you can get. But you don't have access to this once you're on the outside. So I knew I had to continue advocating for myself. So vulnerability, self-advocacy, and self-compassion to say, I'm not alone in this. This isn't the greatest feeling on earth to have to be able to walk in and say, guys, I don't know what's wrong with me. I need help. And I'm here today, not suffering from a vast majority of the things that I was just a few years ago. And even on my worst days, I know that it's okay. Things dissipate. Chronic pain, I get it. We all want to seek comfort. I challenge you out there to seek discomfort. It tells you you're alive. It tells you that you're still moving. Be willing to be in discomfort. That's one of the greatest things I learned through this journey.
Yeah, this discomfort is definitely a part of the life that we have to live through, but we also have to move through it smartly. And going through a treatment facility, doing this with doctors and professionals or people that have been there before can really ease a lot of the anxiety when we start feeling that, unfortunately, even as I still talk to veterans and service members, there's like this machismo, if you will. I don't want to necessarily call it toxic masculinity because it doesn't just exist in men. It exists throughout the service. It exists throughout, the first responder community and whatnot. What role do you think this bravado plays in the mental health of people?
Is just ignorance. And that's true. We don't know any other course because we've been taught wrong. It's not toxic masculinity. I know tons of veterans are dealing with the same disgruntled, angry, oh, I need this. PTSD is a superpower. That's a phrase I hear. Oh, I need PTSD. No, you don't. Let go of that idea. You can heal from that. You can 100% heal from that. But we make it our identity when we're almost patted on the back for having that. It takes work. It takes a lot of dedication to go do opposite action, going against it. It's certainly something that is real. PTSD, we know, is real. It affects countless veterans. We deal with it on a day-to-day basis, but you have a choice in this fight. You either embrace it like an identity or you embrace it as a diagnosis, something you can overcome. It's another enemy. Understand the battlefield. What is the enemy? PTSD. How do I overcome it? How do I fight this enemy? It is not a comforting diagnosis to keep on and put on like a jacket. Fight that. You are 100% more effective in your community by being able to embrace the reality and the truth of what it means to be a veteran, or be a resilient individual who can overcome. And you can use all different types of modalities to fight this enemy. You just have to be willing to do the work. And I know it's hard. It's not easy, but it's a fight that all of us should embrace.
Yeah, I know that work can be hard, especially in the beginning. Like there's such a tremendous amount of effort, but if you put in enough reps, it begins to get easier. I know that that's been my experience. It's not that the PTS injuries are completely gone from my life. I mean, they can creep up and begin winning. I can revert easily. So there's certain steps that I have to take in order to manage mine. What does your kind of like daily life look like to improve and maintain your mental health on a daily basis? Like what practical steps are you using to improve your mental health regularly?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. And we have to first state that you first have to understand that you need help. And it starts with doing the big work up front, getting help with a licensed mental health care team, understanding what the enemy is, and going. And I know it's hard. It's hard to sit down and say, I'm going to go pick up the phone. I'm going to call and get help. But it's absolutely the first place to start. And then as you go through that journey, adapting the tools, your toolkit becomes your own. My toolkit right now is mindfulness, exercise, faith, being plugged into the present moment. And I get it. You have a bad day, you want to snap at somebody. Breathe, take a time out, understand that. Don't attribute that to malice. Everybody's got their own issue. Everybody has their own things going on in their life. They probably didn't know that they were ruining your day by rear-ending you. Hey, deep breath, it's going to be fine. Everybody loses their temper. Be able to rebound. For a lot of us, we're dealing with that inner critic too. Be willing to challenge that inner voice every single day. Be willing to do the work. All of us have to be able to stay present and engaged. That's what mindfulness does for me. Medication's another thing. I didn't want to do pills for the rest of my life, but I used them. I used my medication while I was still going through some of the worst parts. And then when I was ready to have that conversation with my mental health provider, I had the conversation. Hey, I've been doing some research. These compounds stay in our body for a really long time. How can I downstep? How can I start taking less? You can't go cold turkey on your own. Absolutely do not do that. Take your medication. And then when you're ready, when you think that, hey, you know what? Let me talk to my provider. Let's see if there's maybe something else that I can do. That is a perfectly normal and healthy conversation to have. But too many of us don't want to talk to our providers. We just want to, I don't feel like taking it. No. Take the medication and then ask and be responsible enough to look at ulterior modalities. Be willing to engage in those conversations. I didn't want to at first. And then I started reading. I started engaging in conversation with my doctors. And you know what they said? I think that we can do X, Y, and Z. Let's put you on this medication. We'll make it easier for you to downstep. Like, oh, wow, awesome. That's a healthy, natural approach. I still use therapy. I still do conventional talk therapy. I still lean into all the things that got me to where I'm at today, just not regularly, because it should never be a consistent part of your life. At some point, you have to take the training wheels off and ride your bicycle. If you get in trouble, if you fall down, I still have my therapist number. I still reach out if I get to points where I'm like, you know what? Maybe the next couple of months, while things are really challenging, I need to vent through and have an actual doctor. The other thing that a lot of people don't talk about is peer-to-peer support. Trust in your community and be willing to reach out through the vet center or any other organization that offers peer-to-peer support. Sometimes you just need to talk to your tribe. And it's a huge resource that more veterans need to be plugged into. Why? Because at first you show up as somebody that's in the group needing support. As you go through it, as you advance and you get better, then you get some certifications and maybe now you're leading the group. Maybe now you're helping heal others. And that's what I love about peer-to-peer support. When you are ready, when you've proven to yourself that you're doing good, you can start getting the certifications. A VA has programs for it. You can help those around you as well. So those are some of the things I advocate for. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, be willing to explore alternate modalities. Right now, there are so many avenues of approach in getting, especially if you're a veteran, if you're wanting to try and be part of clinical trials for psilocybin, MDMA, resources are out there. And lastly, be willing to go to a treatment center. There's so many that are free of cost. All it takes is your courage to go into the unknown. Tons of them. Heroic Hearts, Mighty Oaks, you name it. They're out there and they're there for you. Sometimes that's the best place to start.
Thank you for bringing us through that step by step. I mean, there is a plethora of resources, and taking those training wheels off was definitely like one of the scariest things that I did. And it took me quite a few years to actually do it, because what I had learned in my inpatient process and over the years were certain things that worked for that time to get through the roughest of times. And they were such drastic measures. However, over time, they became to my detriment. They became a crutch that I only knew how to lean on that, which led to further isolation and depression. And it wasn't until I had another moment with my spiritual higher power, God, that I said, "Hey, like I'm gonna set this baggage down, and it's yours," and really embrace the community around me, and just trust that what the work that I did in the past is effective now. Whatever pain I'm still experiencing will be either a part of me or eventually subsided the stronger I get. That's both mental and physical pains. But I had to get back into a community of individuals that had some similar struggles, which was an area that I was avoiding because I didn't want to have to think about it. I didn't want to have to talk about it. And, one of the things that I discovered was they're there to talk about it when I need to talk about it. But at the same time, like, we also just know how to have fun. Like, these pre-interview conversations that I have with you have been such a blast because we have such a similar background that we actually don't have to talk about the background. We can talk about what's going on in life today and like how things are and our interests and stuff like that. So, how do you think like this concept of common humanity can help individuals better understand and empathize with the struggles of others?
Yeah. The one thing I do want to mention is trauma bonding is not always a great thing. There are a lot of groups where it's just individuals oversharing in a constant loop of pain and reliving it. So we don't want to do that. We want to use common humanity, understanding that our pain is not ours alone. Suffering is part of the human experience, and reflecting on that, being able to see and understand that, hey, life happens to everyone. No one's free from this, whether it's me, you, Bill Gates, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, everybody suffers. Everybody's challenged. And that gives you a freedom of understanding, like, okay, I'm stressing over money right now. I'm stressing over finances, but you know what? I'm not the only one. I'm going to lean on my faith. I'm going to focus on present moment. I'm going to leave it up to God. That's just one of the many ways. I'm not alone in this suffering. I can get plugged into my community, and I can share and express the difficulties in a healthy way, to where it's not reliving trauma, where we're not constantly, it doesn't do anything to sit down and just cut ourselves open over and over again. It's counterintuitive. But if I join a group where I can express the things I've gone through and introduce myself to the group, and we can share and we can then continue to grow, that's absolutely healthy. And it helps us all, because now you know what I've been through. We're connected, Denny and Danny. You know my suffering, and it's the similarities. Like, oh my goodness, I've been there. But look where we're at now. And we can continue moving forward. And then when we stumble, man, it's been rough. I've been dealing with the nightmares. I've been dealing with this from X, Y, and Z. Hey, you know what? I know your story. But look at the good that we have today. Let's reflect on the good of today. We'll get over this. It'll be okay. That's infinitely more supportive and more positive than let's dive into this all over again. Because one thing that we're not in this space, we're not licensed therapists. We're not mental health professionals. We don't want it. I can't lead you through EMDR, but I can be a mentor. I can be a coach, and I can be a best friend to you and talk to you and be able to say, hey, we'll succeed again. Tomorrow will be a different day. We'll get back to a good sleeping schedule. You'll be able to crush it tomorrow. And that's what we all need. We just need to be able to steer away from the trauma bonding, which has become very popular these days.
Yeah, I mean, there's a space for that, but, living in that moment, being of service. And I know that you continue to be of service and be a mentor to others, even through your own podcast, Security Halt. What are you doing with that show, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
So Security Halt is something that I created with some friends early on, because we didn't have the understanding of how to get help. We just knew that by joking and by forming what we call in the paratrooper community, LGOP, little groups of paratroopers, we could do just that. We could support each other with jokes. Shout out to Greg and Paul. We started this thing early on And it was just that, keeping each other afloat through humor and laughing and inspiring others like, hey, we don't know what's going on, but we're struggling, and this helps us. As the show progressed, I realized that I needed somebody like Security Halt when I was at my worst. What I needed was advocacy. What I needed were resources. Somebody to Google for me, somebody to say, hey, this is where you can go in the middle of the night. This is what a Baker Act is. This is where a treatment center is down the road. This is what anxiety is. This is what depression is. This is what operator syndrome is. Hey, guess what? Concussive trauma can happen in your field of work as an artilleryman, as a mortarman. These are all things that nobody was talking about. Nobody was highlighting this. But most importantly, nobody was bringing out the lived experience. If I could have found another Green Beret that said, hey, Chief, take a knee. What you're experiencing is not abnormal. It's a byproduct of what we chose to do. But it's going to be okay. We're going to get you to Laurel Ridge. After you get there, we're going to get you to another treatment center to check out your brain space, check out what's going on in there. And then we're going to check out the rest of your body. It's not abnormal. This is just the consequences of being at war. I would have felt at ease. I would have been able to say, oh my God, I'm not alone. And I realized that it's not anybody's fault that we didn't have that. Who wants to be that vulnerable when you're sitting in a room full of America's best? It's hard, but I was willing to be that voice because while I'm just like every other Green Beret, we're right in the middle. Security Halt provides that connective tissue from, suffering in your team room alone to getting the idea and birthing that concept that maybe I can get help. And we're bringing you great resources and great stories of transition, of healing, of moral injury that often isn't accessible to us because we're not wanting to hear it. We've never heard of the providers. And there's just things that we didn't have growing up. Nobody talked about mindfulness when I was a kid. Nobody talked about emotional intelligence when I was a kid. Never heard of Brene Brown until I was suffering. But if I can bring these concepts and talk about all these great things and bring in the professionals to the show to give it to the audience, maybe I can help somebody else avoid the hardships that I went through. And that's what it's all about. And to date, it has worked. The amount of response that we get from people saying like, I didn't realize how bad I'd gotten. And because of your show, I'm willing to get help. And even better, the guys that reach out and say, you know what? I followed your lead and I was able to become a team sergeant now because I took some time off. It's not about always walking away from service. It's identifying that you need help, taking that knee, getting help, and then you can continue serving if that's your path. Because the one thing that we have to understand is it is your life. Nobody else is in control. When you're done, you are done. You get to decide. You get to decide and walk into your next chapter proudly with your head held high. For 20 years, you did exactly what everybody asked of you to do. You deployed. You went to every school. You achieved everything you could under the sun. Now it's time for you to get help. Now it's time for you to put your health first. And that's more than okay. And that's what I like to promote on the show. Be able to be that voice of reasoning that says, hey, you're a cool guy. You've done some great things, but maybe we need to talk to a professional.
Denny, I absolutely love what you're doing with Security Halt. It's important work. And I love that there's other veterans like myself out there taking the initiative to have these conversations in a very safe and like uplifting environment. And when you had said, it's not always about leaving the service. It's about taking that knee. I'm a marathon runner. I'm hoping to one day get to the ultra running space. And every coach that I've ever read and what I coach people on now to get to where I'm at is that it's okay to walk during a marathon. Not everything has to be pushed as hard as we can every day. But if we can give 80% effort, 90% of the time, or even 80% of the time, we're going to continue to grow. We're going to be able to have a much longer experience, whether it's our military career, our family life, our marriage, our post-service job. One of the things that I failed to do when I got out of the service is I took that 100% mentality to my first civilian job, and I burnt out really quick. Yeah. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with me. I don't need to give 100% every day because that's an unsustainable pace.
Absolutely.
And it leads a lot of people to burnout, and it leads a lot of people to struggling and then thinking something is wrong with them, especially after the service that we gave 100% as often as we could. And unfortunately that leads to ongoing struggles and increasing suicide rates among service members, veterans, first responders, people that are just high performers that on the outside their lives look immaculate, but on the inside they are suffering in silence. What message of hope would you have for somebody that is currently going through that battle and suffering in silence?
And something that I say all the time, you're not alone. You didn't make it through deployment on your own. You didn't make it through that last mission in Afghanistan by yourself. You're not a one-man army. We get through this together. We absolutely do. I'm not here because I healed by myself. I'm not here because I found some magical wand that took everything away and gave me clear thinking and a healthy understanding of my own mental health issues. No, I'm here because of the backbreaking work done by freaking countless medical professionals and my own brothers. We don't get through any of this by ourselves. We have to be willing to be vulnerable, self-advocate, and figure out self-compassion and understand that you get through this together. Lean on your family, your wives, your husbands, your brothers, your tribe, and go into healing in that with that bold attitude of, I don't know what this looks like on the other side, but I'm willing to go into the unknown so I can live to succeed again.
That's amazing. And, I personally know that it's a much better picture on the other side. You talk about the picture on the other side of that battle regularly. Like that's how we attract our listeners. That's how we are able to be impactful mentors for our community. And I want our listeners to know, where can they go and learn more from you?
Yeah, hit us up on our website, securityhalt.com. Listen to the show, watch it on YouTube. We have put together some amazing shows, some amazing episodes with great insight from so many individuals. One thing that I am so proud of is we don't glamorize the trauma of what we've been through. You're not going to sit down and listen to a combat story where you hear how we lost brothers or sisters. You're going to come down and you're going to understand the gravity of the situation. But bringing you through a 45-minute episode of my combat, of my trauma, isn't going to do you any good. But if I show you the wounds, if I show you how we went through and we triaged it and how we went through and we figured out what we needed to get help, it's going to be more successful. It's going to be more of a resource for you. And we also bring in, like I said, amazing providers and amazing people from all walks of life that can speak to your journey. And it appeals to so many individuals. So please check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, and our website.
Thank you so much, Denny, for your time here today on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, please remember you can also catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.